Hello there, and welcome to a short video explaining how to use the parametric modeling tool in Fusion 360. So if you're a beginner or maybe an intermediate, but an intermediate that doesn't really experiment too much, you might not be familiar with parametric modeling. So I'm just going to create a sketch here. I'll do it on the top plane. Go create a rectangle. Let's give it some arbitrary values. 70 for the width, 50 for the depth, finish sketch, and 40 for the height. Okay, so we've got this cuboid. Well, let's say I was trying to make a brick instead. So what needs to happen is it needs to be wider. So there's two ways that a beginner or an intermediate in Fusion would probably go to in this case. One would be, and I imagine the first protocol would be to edit the first sketch and then just update our value in Fusion. Much more brick-like, but actually probably needs to come in a slight bit. Let's say 110. This is just a scale brick, whatever. The other way that people might do it, so I'm just going to undo a sec, so go back to when it was 50. The other way other people might do it, if they're perhaps more familiar with Fusion but less familiar with other CAD programs, is they might use the press pull tool. So select a side with a left click, then right click, press pull, and you can drag out your sort of distance. And I would describe this tool as it's sort of gimmicky, sort of arty. Like if I was, I don't know, I can't really think of an example. I don't use the press pull tool. It's not really one I like to use because I'd rather just give something an exact dimension. I mean, you'd never see this in like engineering or any industry that relies on accuracy, because the problem is that I actually don't currently know. I think it was 50 across before, but I'm not 100% sure. And let's say it has to be 81.5 across. Well, I've got to then do the maths and be like, okay, so this would have to be 31.5. And that's fine if that initial sketch is like some simple integer like 50, but it rarely is so simple. So the press pull tool I would just steer clear of. So now on to what I think you should be learning how to use. And I know I'm just doing it for a brick, a very basic shape. It's actually much more helpful in complex models where you've got to make changes. But that's the change parameters tool. So I'm going to quickly just give it a keyboard shortcut. So you can do that by selecting these three dots, change keyboard shortcut, and I'm going to give it the shift and the hashtag button. That's usually what I use. But I'm just going to open it up the normal way. So change parameters. You're then given this sort of spreadsheet style layout, and you can basically add these little dimension things. So let's call it the cuboid width. Also notice how in this, the space, you can't have a space in the name of a user parameter. It has to be sort of one word, so to speak. So I would, if I'm doing cuboid width, it's two words, I would capitalize the W. So I could write it out as cuboid and then width, but because I know that I'm not going to be using any other shapes, I'll just call it C width. And let's give that a dimension, first of all, of 50. And in the comment section, I've only ever used this to basically explain what the name of the parameter means in full. So that's just usually what I put in the comments. So let's do that, and then cuboid depth. So C depth. Actually, I think this one was 50. Might have to change my first one. It's a very simple thing to do. So you can just change your expression. And then finally cuboid height. and this is 40. So let's put this in. And let's just make sure we've given it a... Oh god! I spilt water on my desk, so my desk is very damp. Cuboid height. Okay. So now we can reassign these values to these. So cuboid. Well, rather than typing cuboid width or C width, I'm just going to type in CW. Press the enter tool first to get it to show up in the dimension box, and then enter again. So this is, yeah, just punching these into the dimension value. So in this case it's C depth, cuboid depth, and that's that one. And then edit feature, cuboid height. So now everything has been dimensioned, but it's been dimensioned parametrically. So now if you said, oh, I need to make it wider, I'm just going to use that keyboard shortcut to get to this table, and I'm going to make sure we can see it. So I need to make it wider. Okay, let's call it 110. Or let's say it needs to be really wide, incredibly wide brick, 1000 mil. No problem. You can just punch it in here, and that's great. It's a lot of fun. But I'll go back to, I don't know, 115. That's where I'm going to settle as our sort of brick width. Great. So what's the other purpose of parametric modeling? Well, treat it sort of like an Excel spreadsheet. In this expression box, you don't just have to write dimensions, you can write equations. So if there are certain curves that need to be figured out by a sine or a tan or a cosine rule, whatever, you can do it in here. It's great. There are expressions. So within the expressions, there are some specific ones, as like min, max, the largest value, etc. And they're available online on Fusion somewhere. I can't remember. I'll try and find the link for it and post it at some point. But if you wanted to do a complex equation, not all of the tools are the same as in Excel. Like as in formula rules, they have different titles. Also, you don't have to just work in millimeters. You can work in centimeters, meters, microns, miles, etc. But not only that, you can do it for degrees and for angles and things. Currency, I sometimes use mass, and that's kind of fun. So if you're doing an equation, you might want to use one of these instead to try and figure out, you know, the weight of an object. One of the ones that people might miss because they don't think you can click on it is no units. So sometimes no units is good. So let's say that we're going to give no units 5, a value of 5. Sorry, we're going to give it let's call it 5 and give it a value of 5. Actually, this is better if we just call it random integer for this example. Integer, I think that's how you spell it. There's no point putting it in a comment because it's the full thing. So let's say that the height is 5 times smaller than the width. So what we can do is, rather than writing out as 40, so let's type in C width, enter, and divide it by random integer. Well, now that's changed, and we can change this value to 3, a half, so it would actually be bigger. Let's go back to, I don't know, 4. 4 seems fine. So why did I put no unit in this value here? Why did I click no units instead of putting millimeters? Well, because if it's 4 millimeters, the equation doesn't make sense. And in simple equations, sometimes it does work out, but in more complex equations, applying an actual measurement onto an integer that you're just using to times doesn't make a lot of sense, and sometimes it just doesn't work. So let's do the same again, and we're going to just call this one var integer with millimeter symbol, and I'm going to give it the same one, and we're going to put in 4, and this time I am going to give it a comment random integer in millimeters. So now we're going to change this value to random integer with millimeters, and it does work. And the reason why it does work is because our width is in millimeters and our integer is in millimeters, which is great. But if I did that same calculation, say there was some angle needed in this, I don't know, sometimes you can have like a radian and a millimeter, and you end up dividing things and it just doesn't compute. So I would recommend just using the no unit tool where you can. And if you wanted to do a measurement, so you could, it would be really dumb, but remember random integer, it's got no measurement value. So let's create a sketch on the top or something, and put a hole through the center, and the diameter is going to be 4 millimeters. Well, what I'd actually do, if I had random integer, sorry, I'd have to times that, which is asterisk 1 millimeter, and I don't want that to, and now it gives me a value. Whereas if I just put in random integer, which is the unitless, see how it puts unitless? Sorry, make sure we get that. It won't allow me to input it because there is no unit to it. So you have to times it. You can times it by 1 millimeter, or you can times it possibly by millimeter. Yeah. And that now gives it a value. Equally, we know that's millimeter, but if we go back into our parameters table, we can see that we have other options. So we could times it by a centimeter, possibly, I think. Although I am working in millimeters, a bit confusing, I know. But let's try that in centimeters. So random integer times by cm. There we go. And that's 40 mil. Cool. Anyway, I hope that's, I don't know, explained some stuff about the parametric modeling. And if you'd like to know more about it, I'm more than happy to do a longer tutorial explaining its uses. But yeah, give it a go. I mean, it's really practical in industry. I guess one of the major things is you might think when you're modeling in, parametrically, it's taking longer to create a model, and sort of it does. But if you ever have to make a change to a model, it saves you so much time, and no model that you make is ever perfect. There's always changes and updates that people want. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that's been helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Stop.